So we had three breakout questions on the table. The first of which, what is the thesis of the reading? The second one being, what's the role of religion in establishing the negative stereotypes and myths? And then finally, what were your thoughts on the curse of Ham? Who would like to share what was discussed in their breakout groups? Go ahead. Go ahead, Mishara. It's on you.
Okay, so do you want me to go over all of them or do you want me to just
Do the first one and we'll work our way through.
Okay, so I thought that the thesis was basically talking about how Black historians wanted to seek reconstruction of Black historical experience. So the entire chapter went over how we need to do that. And to do that, we need to talk about the myths and stereotypes that were created over time.
Thank you. Perfect. Anyone else want to add to the thesis of the text? So it was discussed in their breakout groups around the thesis. Oh, go ahead, Sophia.
I just said that the thesis is diving into all the historical times in which the African people were degraded and put into a negative narrative,
Okay.
and then explained how I put in quote that Black inferiority continues to thrive in minds thanks to just Western history and these Western philosophers and putting their wrong ideas out there, and it just continued to spread and spread and spread.
All right, perfect. Thank you. What's the role in religion in establishing these negative stereotypes and myths? What was discussed in your breakout groups? Go ahead, Lucas.
We talked about how the curse of Ham was one of the main things that at least religion talks about when it comes to like Black people and how like they should they're literally like cursed to be like enslaved, and how um like their children were literally like they will like transform, I guess, to like how like a Black person would typically look, or person of African descent.
Perfect. Thank you, Lucas. Anyone else on the role of religion in establishing the negative stereotypes and myths? Go ahead, Tiffany.
One of the things that I picked up on in the reading was the fact that the Bible kind of played a role in it, and the fact that the Bible didn't really talk about or I think that reading said condemning it, so it kind of gave the impression that it was okay for or slavery and all those other things to happen.
Perfect. The role in the Bible. Absolutely. So what were your thoughts about the curse of Ham? Like not so what did the reading say about the curse of Ham, but what were your own thoughts about it? What did it make you think about? Belvina?
It just made me think about the fact that when they used to talk about people of African descent, they kind of portrayed them in like an animalistic way, and they made it seem almost like it's like when you're a kid and you read those fairy tales, and it's like you don't want to go to no man's land because there's all these monstrous creatures, and I feel like that's kind of how they depicted Africa without fully knowing about Africa. And
Mm-hmm.
it really made me mad.
Yeah, good call out. I like, yeah, because it's the, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say some shit, but I'll say that for later. Other thoughts? What did you think about the curse of Ham? Was anyone familiar with the curse of Ham before reading this? This was all your first time? Okay. We'll get into my notes then. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lucas.
Sorry, I was just gonna say how it was kind of like it was just really sad to see how like the Bible like I don't know how to explain it, like they they make like you know people of cultures like features as like something bad, like having like bigger lips or like a wider nose or something like that. Like I feel like, you know, it's so ingrained in our history for like just because Westerners, you know, typically just they like to take over everything, I guess. I don't know.
Nah, you're right. And I guess about it. That's exactly what happened, right? Absolutely. So just to kind of provide like an overview and kind of like have you think about what we're doing so far and what we've done so far leading up to this point, right? So if we think about the first 2 weeks of the semester, I provided you with an overview of who African people were, right? And then we got into some literature that shaped early African civilizations through the teachings of Ptah. Now, if you're being critical and analytical about the information that you're receiving, you may have had the thought, well, how does it go from what we learned about African people in the first 2 weeks of class to what I think I know about African people in the world today, right? Like there's a disconnect there. And the purpose of this reading is to kind of fill in the gap to that disconnect. And then Wednesday's reading will also help fill in the gap to that disconnect. The book is called Africans and Their History. The author is Joseph Harris. So I'll start with the beginning. I'm looking at the first page, the second paragraph. Race in general, and myths and stereotypes surrounding physical features, and skin color in particular, have been so pervasive and basic in Black and white relations and in accounts of those interactions that, in spite of the stream of scientific evidence to the contrary, the concept of Black inferiority continues to thrive in many minds. So what they're saying is there's no scientific evidence that supports this notion of Black inferiority, right? There's no scientific data, there's no scientific research that supports the notion that African people are inherently inferior and European people are inherently superior. Now, what I will say is there is a pseudoscience that was produced to support these racist myths, right? And this is what I'm talking about is like that science that says, because of the size of someone's head, that's going to determine how smart they are, right? These are these very fake and false sciences that they use to support their racist claims. But the book is saying there is no scientific evidence that supports this notion of African people being inferior. Second page, the first full paragraph, it states perhaps the best approach to an understanding of this problem should begin with an examination of some of the early characterizations of Africans in history in order to see how the roots of racial prejudice became interwoven into Western culture, which internationalized the concept of Black inferiority and colonized Africa's history. So for me, what's important? Well, two things, right? He's telling you, if you want to kind of understand something, right, and you want to understand the origins of a particular problem, you got to go back to where they started, right? So let's start to think about how these characterizations of African people begin, right? And then through that, we can see how they become so intergrained, interwoven into our Western society, right? And we don't have to make this too theoretical or abstract, right? Like, look at the dictionary. If you go to the dictionary and look up the word Black, the definition will signify and connotate everything and anything negative, right? There will be no positive association with that word Black in the dictionary. If you were to look up the word white, it will be associated with all things positive. I believe pure, just, things of that nature. Now, I don't understand how a color can signify purity. Don't know how that works. It's just a color, right? But this is part of our normal conceptualizations around these two particular colors, right? So think about it this way, or I'll put it to you in these terms. What's the one lie that's acceptable? What's that one lie that you say is not that bad? You're using English language all the time. Oh, it's a little lie. What kind of lie is that?
A white lie?
Little white lie, right? Not that bad of a lie. Won't cause too much harm, right? What's cat is bad luck? Right? The black cat, right? So you see how even in our language, we employ these things without thinking about it. And we believe these things to be true, right? Like people are literally afraid of black cats because they believe it brings them bad luck. crazy. But this is what he means when he says that it becomes interwoven in the fabric of Western culture. Now, one thing I have to push back against that the claim that the author makes is on page 3. It says that the Ethiopians were blameless, as Homer described them, need not have signified equality, but could indeed have intended to describe their remoteness from civilization, the farthest most men, and imply that they were thus ignorant of and not responsible for the complex problems of the civilized Greek world. So what he's claiming is that when Homer described the Ethiopians in the Odyssey, right? And now keep in mind, when we use this term Ethiopians in this context, it's not like people who are only from the area of Ethiopia. All Black folks were considered Ethiopians in this point of time, right? So he's saying that when Homer wrote about the Ethiopians being blameless, he did not mean that they were equal or speak to their equality to Europeans. That's not the point he was trying to make. He's claiming that Homer is trying to speak to their remoteness from civilization, right? So they were removed from the civilized world. They didn't have the capacity to think about the problems that the Greco-Roman Empire had to deal with, right? Because they were uncivilized. I have to push back against that, right? Because simply the term blameless means without blame. That's what blameless means. And if you think about what we learned about African people in the first 2 weeks, things like Ma'at, right? The principles of truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, propriety. When you think about the teachings of Ptah-hotep in the sense that you want to create a world and a society that is strifeless, right? No conflict, no bickering. It would make sense why those people will be considered blameless. It would make sense that if something happens in the room and something's missing or a fight breaks out, who you would not consider the perpetrator of that incident to be African people, right? Because we know those people, they're about harmony above all else. They're about knowledge above all else. They're about eliminating strife above all else. So to me, that makes more sense that Homer meant that they were blameless, just as is, right? Opposed to what Joseph Harris is claiming within the text. Now, I understand why he's framing it in that way, because that supports the argument that he's trying to make. But for me, and upon a read, not only of this, but a reading of Homer's Odyssey, I don't believe that's what he meant, right? So one, I want to bring this up to show you as scholars and as intellectuals, you don't have to go along with everything you read within these texts, within these pages. You don't have to go along with everything that you hear from me, right? But what you should be able to do is have the capacity to be critical and cross-reference things, right? So if this book is making a claim that says A, B, and C, so let me pick up this book, and this book is to see if they make the same claim. And if it does, then that for me allows that to be true, right? These are 3 separate sources that are making this one claim. So that's cross-reference, and I can state that to be true. Now, if this book is saying one thing, and these 2 books are saying something different, then I'm have to go with these 2 books because it's the 2 sources that are supporting this one idea where this one is just one, right? So this is what I mean when I say cross-reference. You have to, as scholars, be able to have the capacity to go out and cross-reference information. Now, fuck being a scholar, right? For people in the world today, especially y'all age, right? And I don't want to sound like the generation wars. It's not what I'm saying, but like, let's just talk about it. Right now, we're in a world where we have so much information thrown at us, but so much of that information is misinformation, right? And if you don't know how to go get real source material, you'll be vastly confused and ill-informed. It's imperative to know how to go get this source information. It's not a mistake that you're being over inundated with misinformation, and at the same time, they're banning access to certain books. Be aware of what's going down. Like, they're dumbing us down, right? We have to pay attention to this. So in order to thwart that process or to mitigate or to counteract that process, you have to know how to go get some real source information. Not YouTube, not Twitter, right? That's not real source information. You got to go to the books. All right. Going this notion of the curse of Ham it's fascinating because not only one, it's clearly bullshit, right? Like, let's just put it where it is and put it out there as it is, right? It's bullshit, but how it reverberates to me becomes fascinating because not only do non-African people believe this to be true, but I think more insidiously, African people believe this to be true, right? Has anybody heard of the Hebrew Israelites? So there'll be few of you. So for those who have, then you know what I'm talking about in the sense that these are a group of African people who believe that African people were the original Israelites. I have no problem with that. Where I do have a problem is buying into the concept of the curse of Ham. By and large, Hebrew Israelites believe that this is a true thing, right? Another way you may, for those who don't know about the Hebrew Israelites, another way I can help make a connection. For those who listen to Kendrick Lamar. So if you really listen to Kendrick Lamar, think about the album Damn, okay? On the album Damn, think about his interludes with his cousin Carl. Cousin Carl is a Hebrew Israelite. And if you think about his interludes with Cousin Carl, you think about when he says, I'm trying to tell you, cousin, it's because we are a cursed people. We come from a cursed people. This is this Hebrew Israelite type of philosophy, right? It's bullshit. But hear how these things reverberate in a real way, right? Call it what it is. I have a very broad nose and I got some big lips, right? I love them shits though. I wouldn't change that for the world. But not everyone feels that way. And we have people who will do very painful and harmful things to their face to make their nose look a little bit slimmer and a little more European. Thinking the likes of like someone like Summer Walker, right? The nose she came in the game with ain't the nose she got right now, right? There's people, because of how our society is operating and how it's oriented, will do very harmful things to their skin to make their skin look lighter. In the Caribbean and West Africa, they have a very large problem with skin bleaching. Anybody familiar with the likes of Sammy Sosa? No? Give me 1 second. So Sammy Sosa was a baseball player from Cuba. So you can see the image, correct? Can y'all see this? So this is what Sammy Sosa used to look like. This weird vampire looking motherfucker is what Sammy Sosa looks like now, right? Go ahead, Sylvie. Did you have your hand up, Sylvie?
My bad, I was talking and I was muted.
Okay.
It's the same with Megan Good. That's someone I was very surprised to hear about.
This is a dancehall artist named Vibes Cartel. This is what he originally looked like. This is ghostly, ghoulish looking character, what he looks like now, right? So Megan Good, yes, Megan Good. But here, if you want to talk about it, y'all watched the Super Bowl yesterday? You see Beyonce appear on your screen yesterday? Did she not look like a white woman? Not even, no, it's not no kind of. She looked like a white woman. Go Google it if you don't believe me. And then after you Google that, Google Destiny Child and see what she used to look like. So what I'm saying to you, these notions of the curse of Ham, it doesn't play out in like the literal sense of being cursed, but it reverberates in the sense that it causes people with with the characteristics of the curse to try to do away with those characteristics. From very harmful practices of skin bleaching, right? No plastic surgeries and all other kind of things that they means that they take to make themselves more Europeanized. Right. So again, you don't have to take it like so literal and abstract. but we can see how these things still have ramifications in our world today, right? And very dubious. I think this page 7 for me, it really kind of speaks to the crux of the why. It gets to the why for me, right? And I'm looking on the bottom of page 7. It says that one is reminded of the note of irony expressed by the French philosopher Montesquieu in 1748. It is impossible for us to suppose these creatures to be men, because allowing them to be men, a suspicion would follow that we ourselves are not Christian. So again, it is impossible for us to suppose these creatures to be men, because allowing them to be men, a suspicion would follow that we ourselves are not Christian. So in other words, right, we can't call ourselves Christian and put these human beings into enslavement. We can't call ourselves Christian and continue to rape their women. We can't call ourselves Christian and tear these families apart, right? But what we're not going to do is stop doing these things, because one, they're very economically beneficial, right? And we don't want to give up our power. So what we'll do, instead of changing our behavior, we'll say that these individuals aren't human. Because you could do these things to animals. You shouldn't, but in their mind, I guess you could, right? You could do these things to property, right? So that's what we'll do. We'll just strip the humanity from them. And then that way, they're subjected to any type of treatment that we offer them, and I can still maintain my good Christian status. So this logic, is through this logic that all of these stereotypes and all of these myths get produced, right? This, for me, is the why. This is the rationale. This becomes the thesis. Or I'll put it this way, this becomes their thesis for their behavior. And if we are to like unpack the layer of that onion even further, right, all of it is a guise to maintain power. It's not about being a Christian or being religious. It's about being able to maintain power, and more importantly, maintain the economic foothold. Because you have to understand, this system of enslavement, it gave the whole Western world its economic power base. Not only the United States, we're talking France, we're talking Britain, all of Europe benefited economically from this system of enslavement. So this is their way of coming to terms with the contradiction of calling yourself a Christian world, but doing inhumane things to people. We just won't call them human. Hence, 3/5 human, right? I want to provide sufficient time for fish bowling. So remember, for the fish bowl, you have to do 2 per semester. You have 1 time to pass. You could talk about what I mentioned in my lecture. You could talk about what was talked about in your breakout groups, or you could literally read from your journal. All that's okay. I'll take 3 people to fish bowl. I'll call out random if I don't have any volunteers. Got you. Mashar, we have you. Is there any other volunteers? Belvina. 1 more. Okay, Janaya. So we'll go in that order. We'll go, excuse me, Mashara, Belvina, and Janaya. Mashara, you're up first.
Okay, so overall, with the lecture and my notes and reading the passage, I guess you could say, this entire chapter of that book had made me really upset. I was just really disgusted and mad the entire time, because I don't know, I was thinking, how could someone hate someone else so bad just because of the color of their skin? It didn't really make sense to me, maybe because we're in a newer time, but I also had to remember that they were prejudiced back then. And it went on for so long, it was just really surprising. But one thing I really did want to point out, which I thought was really, really crazy, was Noah's curse, or Ham's curse, or that. Um, I don't know, it was just really surprising, because I had wrote it down. He was talking about how their firstborn, whom they enslaved, so they'd be slaves, and then their children will be born ugly and black, and then their grandchildren, their hair will be twisted into kinks, and their lips shall swell. It was just, I don't know. It was just, it took a lot out of me to keep reading it. And I wondered if anybody else felt the same. And in the breakout rooms, some people were agreeing, but it was just really surprising overall.
I appreciate the you being attentive to the affect, not the effect, but the affect it had on you, right? Like, and yes, it can take a lot out of you. And truthfully, right, it should make you mad. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like that shit should make you mad. This is fucking ridiculous, right? Like, it should produce that type of emotion in you, you know, regardless of who you are, really, you know what I mean? Because even if you're not black, right? Like, let's not pretend that they can't use these same tactics on you, right? So it definitely should make you mad. And I think that's a rational human response to what you read. You know what I'm saying? Belvina?
I can say I was also very upset. What really kind of started making me mad was when Black people were described as like engaging in stealing and fornication and being violent. It's just like from the beginning, they were deeming Black people as being basically animalistic, you know, um, and that they were making it seem like if someone was European or if someone had more European features, like if they were I think it's called the Hamite, then they were more pure or more civilized. And I just feel like that just made me upset because it's the fact that they enslaved people and treated people like animals and called people animals and said, oh, we want to be good Christians, so we're not going to call them humans. And they still use that and all that to be like, but we're superior though, even though they were the ones causing more violence to those who did nothing to them. And it just made me really upset because it's like with this lecture and also I think another lecture, when we were talking about the readings of Tep, um, how there's always one individual who decides I'm superior to this other person. And once that starts, you can't really stop it because you don't know who started it. And I think that just is terrible.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Janai?
Basically what Velvina was saying, I was pretty much gonna say the same thing. And yeah, the reading also made me very upset, like throughout the whole time. It was to a point where I did kind of stop reading. I didn't like the fact how, they talked about like the skin tone, the hair. Um, there were it was also a quote. It said something about to washing Ethiopian white. Um, yeah, I just really didn't like that quote. And then they also were saying like how Africans were seen as barbaric and like white people could be savages while black people had to grow out of it. And basically like in my Zoom, like the breakout room, we were talking about how like they basically were just like they were interpreted wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to do two things. Time left. One, like just listening to the fishbowl, it's not lost on me that it's three Black women who commented. And then also the connection and the cohesiveness of them being upset about what they read. And it makes me think about the state of our world for Black women, right? And all of the social unnecessary pressures that are put on Black women. From the standard of beauty, right? Like to be able to fit this European weird ass, almost like if to call it what it is, very pedophile driven type of beauty standard, right? have to be very skinny without any curves, and it's just this weird, really weird standard, right? And then you throw in there the issues around colorisms, right? And then the lighter versus the darker and things of that nature. Then you throw in there the conversations around hair texture. And I mean, and then we haven't even started to talk about the other societal pressures that Black women have to go through just trying to navigate through their lives on a daily basis. And I can only imagine having to navigate that, but then having to read this, right? To kind of unpack the origins of where all these things come from. You know, I understand how you would be upset. And then it gets complicated with the notion of you have to be a strong Black woman. So now you can't show any type of regular human range of emotion because part of your the legend of you is you're strong and you're able to hold and maintain these things. Then you can't be angry because now you're the angry Black woman. So again, like all of these social pressures that are put on them based off of these stereotypes and myths, having to hold up something based off of a lie. That's wild. That's a wild burden to carry. And then to have like your partner, as in Black men, also participate in the debauchery, right? Like, how isolating must that feel? So I don't know. I don't know. They just really kind of grabbed me in this moment to kind of think about it from that perspective. And I appreciate y'all who three of you who commented for the fishbowl, because there was power in that presentation, and I think it's not something that should be like just moved from real quickly, right? Like to really sit in that and contextualize the why behind your thought processes, and not to speak for you, but just to kind of share my reflections of what I witnessed and what I observed, right? On the second part, you could lie to me, but don't lie to yourself, right? We can't act as if these stereotypes were something of the past and they don't have contemporary implications in our world today. We can't act like conversations that have in private around Black folks aren't informed by these stereotypes and these myths. We can't act like when you see a Black person hop on an elevator with you and you feel nervous that this is not tied, that nervousness is not tied in these stereotypes and these myths. These are how these things continue for so long. This is how we internalize these myths and stereotypes. I know how I make people feel when they come around me, because I'm big, Black, and bald, right? I know what these stereotypes and myths do when I come into space. So the question becomes, how do you be honest with yourself and think about how are you reproducing these stereotypes and myths? How are you participating in the maintenance of these stereotypes and myths? And I'm not just talking to the non-Black folks, right? Black folks, how do we participate in the maintenance of these stereotypes and myths? How many of us refer to ourselves or our brother or our kin folks as nigga? Is that not a participation in the stereotypes and myths? Not, and I get it, like we reclaimed it and we made it seem, nah, call it what it is. You can lie to me, but don't lie to yourself. That's a participation in the stereotypes and myths. A word that is mean to tear you down and debase you, to continuously signify your inhumanity. You're gonna say we reclaim that? It makes it a term of endearment? And here's how crazy shit is. Black folks are so fucking cool that you got non-Black folks calling themselves nigga, because they trying to be cool. This is where we're at right now. But again, we have to be honest with ourselves. Because if we're not honest with ourselves, we will continue to participate in the perpetuation of these myths and stereotypes. The only way that we stop is by recognizing, like, yes, I do this. Now that I'm cognizant of the fact that I do this, I must begin to course correct behavior so I will no longer do this. You can lie to me, but don't lie to yourself. It does no good. What are you thinking? Questions, comments, concerns? Go ahead, Lucas.
Um, uh, I just wanted to say, like, I wanted to like relate about like the whole like skin color debacle, like in Asian culture, like it's and same with Hispanic culture. I'm both Hispanic and Asian, but at least with my Asian side, when I used to go to my grandmother's, like she used to talk about like skin bleaching and stuff, and like just like I don't know, just like in like every culture, I feel like whiteness is just what they've like forced everyone to strive for. It's like really sad. I don't know. I'm just kind of sad. This reading makes me sad.
Yeah,
But yeah.
you're right. But we have to know so we can do different. We have to know so we can do better, right? And it's not to make you sad, but to make us aware. And it's like we knew this, but now we kind of like put our finger on it. You know, like you had a sense of this. This is not, I don't think by and large this information is new to you. You know what I mean? But now it's maybe a little bit more tangible, right? Like you could pinpoint it. Now you know the history of it, right? Destiny, what you thinking?
Kind of going off like what Lucas said, like I was saddened by it, but also like pretty upset as well. Simply because like where I'm from, it it was like growing up, um, I guess like I'm Hispanic and I lived where it was honestly just Hispanics and Blacks. And a lot of the time it was like they tried to make us feel like we're against each other, like like we're opposite. And like I hated that growing up because it's like I'll have like distant family members saying like, oh, be careful, or like, oh, like don't do this or don't do that. And I'd be like I don't have that experience, like like these are human just like I am. I don't see myself any different. So it's like reading this really just kind of like brought me back to that. And I don't know, just like very upsetting how it still plays into like how you said, like into our world today.
Thank you. Belvina?
Okay, so two things. The first thing I'm gonna say is, um, a light bulb kind of went off in my head. I when looking at the readings and them describing African people as being barbaric, and then seeing how today a lot of Black people are treated by the ones that are supposed to protect us, aka the police. I just realized that African people being called barbaric, whether they were, they weren't, they probably weren't, it kind of gives an excuse for people to be forceful with them and to be evil towards them and to hurt them. It gives an excuse because when someone says, isn't that wrong? Aren't you hurting someone? They can say, well, that person tried to hurt me. Well, I didn't know what they were going to do, so I had to protect myself. And I just hate how stupid of an excuse that is and how that still stands today. And then also, I could relate to growing up around both Hispanic people and Black people. And while there was, I do realize there is kind of like a little bit of like tension in those cultures, but I also I forgot which person told me this, but one of my family members told me they're like actually Mexican people and Black people are one and the same. They're very similar. And, you know, I also do kind of connect the similarities between both cultures. But yeah, back to the whole, it just kind of gives an excuse
Yeah.
for people to be violent.
That's profoundly brilliant. It's profoundly brilliant because I think also what you're speaking to, Bobina, that's the evolution of these myths and stereotypes, right? So what he's writing about is how they were employed to justify enslavement, right? But that traditional enslavement society that as we know it has been eradicated, it has evolved into the prison complex, right? So that same type of miscare and that same type of inhumane treatment is still extended through the prison system. But what's the in between a citizen and a prisoner, right? That's the police. That's going to be the force that takes you from being a citizen to being a prisoner. And what she's telling you is this notion of their inhumanity of African people allows us to be subjected to all type of pain and punishment. You're right. That is what this has evolved to in our now. Why we have the Black Lives Matter movement, why the names of George Floyd, Ezekiel Ford, Trayvon Martin, excuse me, all of those names are significant to you because these stereotypes and myths have made the Black body expendable, susceptible to all type of pain and torture. Jose, what you thinking?
But I think it's like I really don't. I agree with what everybody said, right? Like I don't really have my own thought of how to explain this, right? Because like what I was thinking throughout what everybody was saying, I was like, oh, he said what I was gonna say. So yeah,
What are you feeling?
I feel like confused, but also saddened, like how everything like plays down, you know?
What confuses you?
How like what we're told is like a lie or like new things that are brought up now, and thanks to this class. Because like because of this class, now I know like different things.
Yeah, I think maybe another way to say it is like a disorientation, right? Because I I don't want to speak for your feelings, but I think
Right,
you
right.
may not be confused as you think. You may be disoriented. So, and what I mean is like, so think of it this way, right? Like you have a path that you're going along, and something comes along, some information comes along, and it puts you out for your path, right? So now you don't
Exactly. Yeah.
turn north, east, south, or west, right? So
Right.
it's not that you're confused, you're just like this information is disorienting you. Like what I thought I knew I was on, I'm not too sure about anymore.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Yeah. Thank you.
That's okay. That's okay. And I think for me as an intellectual and a scholar, I'm always careful about saying what I know. I feel like to me to say that I know something is I'm getting into dangerous territory. You don't really what do you know? You know what I'm saying? And then
Yeah.
what you think you know, how do you know that? You feel me? So like we really have to be critical in our knowledge base because we are being informed by very insidious and dubious forces that that are hell bent and dependent on us being confused. Any other last minute questions, comments, or concerns? Bovina?
Sorry, I know that I've spoken a lot today, but you also just made me realize sometimes it is pretty hard speaking on certain topics that have been learned in this class because I know there's a lot of people who, as soon as you mention actual things that have happened to people of African descent, the room gets uncomfortable because a lot of people still aren't, you know, like able to really like accept that certain things happened. And I've experienced before, like I mentioned the whole thing about religion and how Christianity might have been based off of um was it the Kemetic civilization? And someone said to me, they're like, oh no, African people just want to have everything. And I'm like, whoa, with this newly learned information and with someone who probably, grew up with a certain religion their whole life and then being like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. It just kind of like that's when the tension comes into play, is because there's a lot of information that was covered up. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also an interesting response to your statement. We just want to have everything. When we were the first people here, there was a point where we did have everything. So it's not about just wanting, it's just about what it is. There was a time where we did have everything. Why does that make you feel some kind of way? And here's the crazier part. We had everything without stealing it or harming anyone. That's the key. We did it without stealing it or harming anyone. I do know of people who want to have everything, and a lot of people got harmed in order for them to have. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your day. For Wednesday's reading, it's 2 parts, but both of those parts are for Wednesday's reading. So please read it in its entirety. It's the destruction of Black civilization. It's really good. It's a really good read. So please come prepared with both of those read on Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you all on Wednesday. Peace.